Hey everybody, I'm Jeff,
And I'm Linda.
and welcome to another VAPI Fireside Chat, where we're going to talk a little bit about the paranormal by the fireside here. Now, I'm going to turn the camera on Linda here, and she's actually going to respond to a viewer question
Right.
from one of our last videos. Now, the first 3 episodes of this we did prior to putting them out, so a lot of the questions that were asked on those posts, we didn't see. Like, for example, the first video, there were some questions on there. The second video was already filmed, so we didn't get a chance to respond to them in that. Same with the third video. So this one, we want to respond to one of them, which was pretty interesting.
So on the first episode of Fireside Chats, we had a comment from Motion Photos with a Z at the end by Liza, Liza. And she was asking about our experiences with UFOs, if we'd ever seen a UFO, and what the circumstances were. And we thought this was a good question because we both have had experiences with UFOs. There were a couple of times in my life. One time when I was about 13 years old, I went out to visit my aunt and uncle in California. They owned a 35-foot motorhome and had taken us, when we went out on vacation, around to a couple of different places. And one of them ended up being a Thousand Trails campground, somewhere out near Big Sur. I'm not exactly sure where, but this place was one of those that was really cool. We got to go out and see all kinds of things along the West Coast at that particular trip. But there was a time when the adults were sleeping inside the motorhome, and my sister and I were going to sleep in the bed of the truck. And we had a camper shell over the bed of the truck. There was a window down both sides of the camper shell, so that when I was laying in the bed of the truck, I could look up and out that window and see the sky. And my parents were inside the motorhome, and I was going to sleep. But before I had fallen asleep that night, I remember laying down and looking up through that window at the treetops in the distance and seeing something very odd. Now, I classify this as a UFO because really it was unidentified and it was flying, but it was not certainly one of those things that acted like a typical UFO. This was probably somewhere between 50 and 100 little pinpoints of bright white light that were jumping between one treetop and another. There was this clump of trees on the right side of my view and a clump of trees on the left side, with kind of a shorter clump of trees in the center. And these lights were zooming back and forth between these treetops. And even at the age that I was, I kind of recognized that this was not something that science could explain. This was not something normal. And of course, I was like paralyzed in fear. I didn't know what I was looking at. I thought, my first instinct was, this is a UFO, or this is something like ghostly that I'm looking at. And I remember running in when I finally, came to be able to move my body out of my fear paralysis. I ran inside and told my parents and my aunt and uncle what I'd seen. And of course, my uncle started trying to find logical explanations for it. Well, perhaps it was a nearby airfield because the searchlight from the airfield would go back and forth. I was like, no, this is not anything like that. This is not anything like what you're describing. I'd seen airfields all of my life. I knew what the searchlights looked like. But this was something that to this day I can't even explain. I've drawn a picture of it and I've told my parents about it dozens of times, and my father still, kind of says, well, that's pretty odd. Like, I can't really explain to you what exactly that was. But having been in the paranormal field for a number of years now, I look back at it and I kind of think like something like fairies. Like, I'm not a big believer in fairies. I'm not a big believer in those kind of other dimensional creatures and things like that. But, not to say that I don't believe that they exist, but really the fact that this was between 50 and 100 different lights, bright white lights that were flying between these treetops at quite a speed, I must say, It's unlike anything I could have ever imagined in that age, and really to this day I can't come up with any reasonable explanation. Even a paranormal explanation kind of eludes me. Like, I'm still not sure exactly what would have caused that. So I like I say, I do kind of liken it to UFOs. I put it in that category because I'm not sure what else to call it. Um, there was one other instance in my life where I can say we saw a UFO. This was when Jeff and I were both together. We were traveling up to northern Delaware to visit his father. And it was late at night, and it was probably somewhere north of Dover. And, I was like on the verge of being half asleep. I was really tired, but I was still looking out, open eyes, looking out through the windshield of the car as Jeff was driving, and we saw something that was a bright white light that streaked down through the sky and sort of made this shape of a J, of an uppercase J in the sky before blinking out and disappearing. And it was enough to bring me into a full wakened mode. And I looked at Jeff and I said, "Did you see that? What the hell was that?" And he had seen it. He had actually seen what I'd seen. Neither of us could really explain exactly what that was because the speed at which it did that form of a J was much faster than anything that we could have imagined being man-made on Earth. So those are my UFO stories. I do believe that Jeff has a couple of them that are fairly interesting though as well.
Yeah, funny you should ask. Let's go back to 2009. Okay, and this was the time when Scott and I were on a deployment together to Camp Bucca, Iraq. Camp Bucca was basically a prison camp, but our mission was what was called ASO, which was Area Security Operations, where we would basically drive through the villages and drive out around the desert and basically make sure everything was secure out there. But we would stop for these short halts. I was a driver. I drove an MRAP, and we would stop to kind of get out and stretch our legs and to take a breather because it was tough. We worked the night shift, so we were driving all night. And one of these times, we're way out. There were these 7 different bridges that we would go under out in the middle of the desert. Just picture like a highway, a small highway that just goes on and on into the desert forever. What would be considered perhaps the country of Iraq. And we were out there and we were stopped. And we were all standing outside of the vehicles. And this light caught our attention that was in the sky. And this was a red light that was surrounded by 3 equally spaced white lights. And we saw this thing just hovering there in the sky. Now, in the MRAPs, we have this device that was called a Blue Force Tracker, which would actually, I believe that's what it was called, a BFT. But this device would show us where all the friendly forces were. It would show us where the other squads were, and it would also show us any aircraft that was in the area. There was a little drone that they controlled that was called Raven B that would also fly along and do surveillance and such. And this thing, you could hear it when it was low enough to see it. Had one little light on it. This was not Raven B by any means, and it was not showing up on the Blue Force Tracker. So our squad leader, he called this into the desk back at the FOB, and they said, we're not showing anything in that area. We don't know what it is. So we watched this thing, this red light with these 3 white lights, and it slowly raised up into the sky to where, from our perspective, I mean, it obviously wasn't as high up as the stars, but from where our perspective, it came the size of a star, and then it just shot off into the sky, and it was gone. Never seen anything like that. No one knew what it was. And talking to a couple people around there, a lot of the people that have been out there had seen some strange lights in the sky. And we kind of thought, this is Iraq. This is where the action is, per se. perhaps if aliens were to come to Earth to observe, they would want to go where the action is. They'd want to observe the conflict. So it's the perfect place for them to come to and observe if that's what they're doing. I don't know, but we really couldn't explain this. And this was such a pivotal moment because it was just before this deployment that I met Scott and we decided to start a paranormal team. So it was through the course of this deployment that we were doing a lot of research and kind of putting things together. And UFOs came a big factor in what we were. It wasn't just a lot of people focused on one thing or another. We said everything paranormal. We want to know. We want to know what it is. We want to go out there. We want to find it. We want to search these cases of these unexplained mysteries. And UFOs, like I said, were definitely on our list of things that we wanted to investigate. And since then, we've investigated quite a few UFO reports. There was even one right here in the historic Triangle in Williamsburg, where a guy that was in the Army, a guy that was in the Navy that worked on planes, very familiar with aircraft. All their neighbors are out at this barbecue and they see this little triangular shaped object that's up in the air right next to a jet. And this thing just takes off and it's gone. So it was pretty cool. It's been pretty cool looking into these things. We don't get as much callings for them as we do for ghosts. But there was another time that I saw what I believed, I can't say it was aliens, but it was definitely a UFO. I was in pre-deployment training for another deployment, and we were out at Creech Air Force Base, which is out in Nevada. It's literally miles from Area 51. It's not far from Area 51. And of course, me being the person I was at this point, we had already started the team and everything, was around 2012. And I'm asking the instructors out there, like, hey, you ever seen anything weird in the sky out here? And they're like, yeah, we've seen some weird things out here. Like, we really couldn't explain it. And a couple of the guys that were rooming with me, they said, we don't believe in that stuff. There's no such thing as aliens. I've never seen anything strange. Come on, you're crazy always talking about that stuff. So one night, we were doing night firing. And when you're doing night firing, you're out on a firing range. And for this one, it's out in the desert. There's a few, not really, I wouldn't describe them as mountains, more like large hills in the background. You can kind of see their backdrop. And they turn out all the lights. You put on the night vision goggles and use the tracer rounds, and you're out there firing. Well, we're out there. There was 100 of us with everyone that was training, probably a little more than that, out there on the range. And suddenly we all froze where we were. People got their cell phones out, everything else. Because from that mountain range, from over that mountain range, comes this rotating light that comes out into the sky and then it's gone. It's gone. And you're talking about Air Force personnel that are all familiar with flares being dropped from planes and whatever we have out there in the sky now, all different various ranks, are all in awe at this thing. Because no one could believe it. And I'm looking at the guy's phone video later on. I'm like, I gotta see that. I gotta have that video. And you can't tell what it is. You wonder why. Like a lot of times you say, why do people have such shaky video or they have such crappy video of these UFOs? You can't tell what it is. It literally, that's how it came out. Like this guy was holding his phone still, but you can't tell the size of this thing and the different colors that were in it. It just came out as a few white lights twinkling in the sky and were gone on his phone. You couldn't see what it really was. But I'll tell you, the people that were doubters, when we got back to the barracks later on that night, they said, you know what, I thought you were crazy all this time, but after seeing what we saw tonight, I'm a believer. I believe there's things out there. I think there's aliens out there. So these were some pretty cool, intense experiences. And one thing that I'd like to kind of throw out there is with UFOs, a lot of times when people think they actually have a ghost in their house, it could very well be something extraterrestrial because they move about. You think about it, we don't know how these people work. They could very well have a means to mask themselves, to have some sort of a camouflage where they can move about the night as shadows. So people see shadow figures and they think, oh, it's a ghost, it's a dark spirit because it's dark, it's because it's a shadow, it's evil. We get that a lot. But in reality, one of the theories for shadow figures is that in some cases, they're actually aliens, they're actually extraterrestrials. moving about our house at night. And to the human mind, we would wake up and we wouldn't immediately think, oh, there's an alien in my house. We see a dark shadow moving and we think it's a ghost. So we've come to quite a few cases in our time where, through probing the people and asking them these questions, well, it turns out that it seems like it's more so extraterrestrial than it actually is spiritual. And one of the questions we always ask, there was one lady I remember, I forget where the case was. It was out in the country somewhere, and she thought she had a ghost in her house. We'd never released this video. We kept it private, so I'll keep her name and the exact location out of it. Not that I can remember the exact location, but we're out at her house, and all these things were pointing to ghosts. And then there were a few key things where she said, like a strange light that came in through her window and started pulling her towards it and things like that. And I said, you know what? After putting these things together, the things they were seeing moving about the tree tops and stuff like that, I said, it sounds like you have an extraterrestrial case here. And sure enough, about a year later, she messaged and she said, you know what? We cannot believe this ourselves, but across the street from their house was this patch of woods. And she said, we saw this aircraft lift up from these woods and take off into the night sky, and it was gone. So, something to think about. Aliens, it's something we're really interested in. We'd like to know if they're out there, what their intents are, right? And then we could go into a whole other theological debate of how does this tie into, a lot of people will say, well, religiously speaking, there can't be aliens. But without going out into a whole nother thing, I could beg to differ. I could think that they could very well be out there. There's a lot of planets. There's a lot more beyond what we can see and beyond what we have explored. And it's definitely something that I'm interested in.
So, Jeff, in following with our last discussion about UFOs and what we've encountered, some people may say that it would be a little bit more difficult to investigate a UFO sighting than it would the paranormal sightings, like ghosts and things like that. So, what would you say would be your methods by which you would go to investigate a UFO sighting?
With investigating a UFO sighting, it depends a lot on the case. For example, there was one we did a few years back that stands out. It was called the video title was Lights Over Louisa. And I can actually link that at the end of this video if you want to check it out. But in this case, the lady was seeing this repeatedly. Night after night, she was seeing this strange light in the sky that she couldn't explain. So on a case like this, we go out and we set up surveillance. A couple of things that we'll take with us, we'll take binoculars, we'll take telescope, and we'll basically sit there and observe to see if we can see this light. We'll also have a star map. Linda has this great app on her phone that shows us where all the constellations are and all the stars are and everything. And we want to eliminate that. We want to make sure it's not a star. We want to make sure that there's no natural explanation for it. We need to survey the area and see if there's any airports nearby, any large buildings, anything like that. And there was nothing like that in this case. And while we were there, unfortunately, we didn't see anything. So if we get a case where somebody's seeing it night after night, we basically go out there and we observe. Now, if it's a case where there's different stages of UFO sightings, and we actually have forms for all of these things that we'll go out and we'll basically go through this checklist of stuff. So if it's something where a craft actually was reportedly landed, we'll go out there and we haven't encountered this in our time, but we are prepared to go out there and survey the landing site. We look at the vegetation around there and how it was destroyed and any kind of patterns that we can see, anything that was left behind. There's certain methods that we have in place if we ever encounter this situation where we collect these and perhaps send them off to get them tested to see if there are a natural explanation for them. Most of the cases, though, with UFOs, it's just documentation. Someone saw it. It's like seeing a shooting star. So all we can do is we can go out there and we can take their report. We see where the UFO sighting was. We document it. And of course, once again, we look and make sure there's no other natural explanation for it. Airports in the area, large buildings, any kind of lights that might have been seen that did have a natural explanation. With the UFOs, like I said, it's just so fascinating because we've had this guy a while back, and he was visited by them a few times, and to the point where he literally went out behind his house and he saw this craft there with the door open, at least reportedly. And we had this guy all set up to record an interview with him and everything, but it ended up falling through. He ended up disappearing. I don't know if he, just got cold feet at the end, or if he finally got abducted. I don't know. But there have been some cases like that, where these people are repeatedly visited by aliens. It seems like once somebody's abducted or once somebody has a close encounter, they continue to have them. And we wonder why. Why is this person prone to it? It's not like the spiritual realm where some people are perhaps sensitive and can see things and pick up on things that other people miss. This is something that these are, to the best of our knowledge, physical beings and physical crafts that are coming here. And why are they coming to see the same person time and time again? It kind of makes you wonder, is there something about this person? Does this person play some kind of role in history that they're coming to observe? So UFOs are definitely a fascinating thing. I know Scott, he's always been really into UFOs and fascinated with them. One case stands out. This girl in Virginia Beach years ago, and she had a lot of stuff that went on in her life, but she had a few close encounters. One of them was at Virginia Beach. She was on the beach and something came over her. This craft came over her. And she talked about the light that came down and everything else. And then there was something that was off the wall. She was like in a Lowe's department store and the roof of the Lowe's disappeared. And it was going on in her mind. So it kind of makes you wonder if these guys, that they can tap into your mind and mess with you too. But she ended up getting sores all over her head, and she cut them out herself. It was pretty intense, and I believe I have that full in-depth recorded interview lying somewhere in the archives. So perhaps it's time to dig into the archives and release another archive video at some point. But any closing thoughts?
I do have to say that this discussion has actually reminded me of a few times in my life where I wondered if my daughter was seeing something that was UFO related. And she's always seen things that's a little bit off the wall. And being one of those people that investigates the paranormal, of course, I'm the first one to wonder if there's not some sort of a paranormal explanation for it. But I do remember when she was young, her waking me up in the middle of the night, complaining about the lights outside of her window. And I tried to, she was always an extremely intelligent child. So of course I said, are you sure it's not just lights from a nearby house or something of that nature? No, these are bright colored lights in the sky outside my window. Of course, by the time I got up out of bed and went over there to look out her window, she said, they're gone. Like, I don't see them anymore. So I kind of wondered about that incident, but there was another time that I was at my parents' house eating dinner on a Sunday night with her, and she had gone out in the front yard just to kind of hang out and play while we were cleaning up dinner, and she comes back in, and I could see this look on her face. She was terrified, and she says, Mom, you got to come out and look at this. There's lights up in the sky. And so of course I follow her out into the front driveway, and I'm looking up at the sky, and it was an overcast day. There was lots of clouds floating by, but I looked up in the sky and I saw nothing. And she's looking up there and she's pointing, and she's like, you really do not see those lights? Are you serious right now? You don't see those lights? And I was like, no, baby, I don't see those lights. I really don't. And, so she was obviously seeing something that I could not see. You could just see the look on her face that this was not something that she was lying about, that it was not just her imagination getting away with her. I don't know to this day why she would be seeing lights, but kind of an interesting thing. It makes you wonder exactly what these aliens are doing here, and why they're observing us, why they observe certain people more than others, why they seem to be drawn to certain people more than others. And I don't know whether we're just kind of like wild animals that they're, putting a chip on or putting a tag on like we do with other lesser beings, lesser creatures. You put the little tag on their ear and let them go in the wild and see what they do. I mean, maybe that's kind of the instance with the aliens, but whatever the case is, I think if they really wanted to destroy us, they probably would have done it by now.
Yeah.
I
Oh yeah,
mean,
absolutely, 100%.
they probably would have done it by now. So, mere observation is not a problem. It's just when they come at you with the needles in the eyeballs and stuff, like Travis Walton.
Yeah.
Like, that's not going to
I'm
happen.
not trying to get
Like,
any needles in the eyeballs. It's
no,
almost like aliens are scarier than ghosts.
they are.
You
They're
know what I
far
mean?
scarier than ghosts.
Because you hear people getting like messed up by aliens.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear of them getting, of course, like there's a lot of cases of people getting scratched and stuff, but
Yes.
I'm talking, if you're talking about the spiritual realm or
Yeah.
the alien realm, we always say like the living is what you have to be afraid of, and these aliens are
That's absolutely
living
true.
for sure. Do they communicate telepathically? Is there a way they can do that?
Well, then there's no escaping them.
No.
I mean, if they want to snatch your ass up and take you up into their
You're getting
UFO,
got.
you're getting got.
That's
so
all there is to
there's nothing
it.
you can do about it.
Yeah.
So you can't go inside and hide.
No.
They're just going to come through your wall and get you.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
far scarier.
Well, I want to thank you all for watching for this edition of the VAPI Fireside Chats. Until next time, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Linda.
And remember, there's much more to see in the sky.